Have you ever thought about starting your own podcast? When I was trying to get this podcast off the ground, I had so many questions. How do I record an episode? Where do I find background music? How do I get my show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all the other places people like to listen? Where do I find advertisers? The answer to every one of those questions is really simple. Anchor. Anchor is a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, distributing, and monetizing your podcast. And best of all, it's 100% free and 100% ridiculously easy to use. Let me tell y'all. Everybody keeps asking me, what do I do to podcast? I'm telling you, the answer is Anchor. They created my RSS feed. They gave me my first 2 sponsors that you're now hearing on this podcast. I want you to know that I believe in Anchor. I've grown with this platform since February, and I'm going to continuously grow with this platform. So if you always wanted to start a podcast, go to anchor.fm/start to join me and the diverse community of podcasters already using Anchor. That's anchor.fm/start. I can't wait to hear your podcast. You are now listening to the Walk by Faith podcast. I'm your host, Jasmine Stiff, aka The Pretty Plug. I'm on a mission to tell the lost story that combines faith in God and success here on this earth. The world often separates faith and entrepreneurship as if it was mutually exclusive. But I assure you it's not. I interview the following types of people: entrepreneurs, business women, and business men climbing the corporate ladder, founders of nonprofit organizations, college students following their passions, and also artists on the rise. They are movers and shakers in this generation, and I intend to plug you in week after week with content that inspires and educates you to be all that you are called to be. Thank you for tuning in, and now for this week's episode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Season 2, Episode 2 of the Walk by Faith Show. Last time you heard my voice, I was wrapping up my 25th episode on the show. I shared lessons learned, what it took to create this podcast, and I had some great guests along the way. Now, my guests have not stopped. In fact, I'm coming to you with some heat this season. People of all walks of life, businesses that you have never heard of, and of course, entrepreneurs, business people who are creating things that you have never seen before. As always, please take a moment to rate this podcast 5 stars so that I can continue to reach more people and bring content to you week after week. This episode is the first of its kind. She is a doctoral student in the joint degree program of Anthropology and African American Studies. In 2016, she received a BA summa cum laude in social and cultural analysis from New York University. You guys, all I graduated was thank you, Laude, okay? Prior to starting the program, she was an analyst at Goldman Sachs in the corporate services and real estate division. She worked for the firm's environmental, social, and governance group. And more broadly, her research interests encompass questions of community and racial formation, subversion, and the impacts and controls of capitalistic processes within Black populations. You guys, this is a powerful Black woman. Do you hear me? Her current research project is a study of Black financial professionals in Wall Street, and her current research project is a study of Black financial professionals on Wall Street and its periphery and their modes of subversive and fugitive practice within the financial industry. You guys, if I can't even say it, that means she's doing some really, really big things. Okay, y'all know I'm country, and I be out here trying. But listen, our guest today is. Please welcome our guest, Rachel Laryea, CEO of Kelewele and future Dr. Laryea. Rachel, how are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm very excited. This is a really exciting moment. I'm really happy to be talking with you, Jasmine. So I'm good.
Yes, girl, and you were just telling me how you are preparing for your weekend festivities. But you know
Yeah.
what is better? I want to know, one, what is the most fascinating thing that you have seen from the Black community and from people of color since the political climate has changed? And you know, you guys, I always start off with an icebreaker. So, Rachel, give us some context.
Mhm. Wow, well, that's a big question. I think that something that's been most fascinating, and you know what? We're always in moments of like innovation and creation, but I think some of the most fascinating things that I see coming from Black communities and from Black people in general are things that we've been doing for as long as we can recall in different points of history, because my mind goes to the ways in which, we're supporting each other through the creation of different Black businesses, organizations that Black people are creating. And I think there's such a moment of a shared mentality around let's support each other, let's promote each other, let's really try to sustain and scale up Black businesses and really get them off the ground or continue them if they're off the ground. I think that's been a really incredible thing that I've been seeing a lot of. But at the same time, that's no different than moments before where, people are organizing, really focusing on Black business, keeping money within Black communities and such like that. So it's just a continuation, but still nonetheless fascinating and kind of encouraging, especially in this political climate of isolation and ostracization. I think there's been a lot of focus on, really building our community economically and how that can allow for kind of social and political mobility as well within our community.
Okay. Thank you, Rachel,
Mm-hmm.
for that perspective. And what is something that you can see we can improve on, especially since the political climate has changed?
I mean, I think improve on, perhaps, we can always be having a conversation around how to better educate ourselves. There's never just like a one and done, read this manual, you understand all things when it comes to like our social, political, economic state. There's always something to be learned, always something to, challenge ourselves on, always something to critique in terms of, practice. So I would say collectively that's always something that we can be striving towards, a greater sense of understanding and awareness of our, environment and how we can do things to potentially change the landscape of that environment. So I would say that.
Okay. And not a lot of people know you right now, Rachel. But
Yes.
that's the beginning, because not a lot of people knew Oprah, not a lot of people knew Steve Jobs, not a lot of people knew these famous people that we now know of today. But Rachel, at this moment, just tell us some fun things about yourself and also how you started studying anthropology, because for me, I went to Prairie View. Nobody was studying anthropology, but I feel like you are like the second person I've met. But I just want you to tell us who you are and like how you started studying anthropology.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of just a little bit about myself, I am the child of, immigrant parents. My family's from Ghana, Accra, Ghana, and my parents came over here in their, at least my mom in her mid-20s, and I was raised, by my mother. And so I grew up, with her and my older brother in a very Ghanaian, traditional Ghanaian home. I started my college career actually at Boston College, where I was a biology major. And I mean, this is true in a lot of immigrant homes. You're expected to be a doctor or a lawyer. And so I was going the medical route until I realized kind of early on that I really didn't like pre-med. I didn't like the classes I was taking. I was very excited about it. It was more so just about like fulfilling my parents' my mother's dream rather than my own. And so I started to make a shift into things I actually really cared about, which is more so around like social sciences, humanities. And so I actually changed majors to African American studies and English while I was still at Boston College, because I felt like that fit more with what I cared about, what I was interested in. But even so, I still wasn't very happy with kind of the academic setting that I had at Boston College. And so, I was decided if I'm going to be in college for 4 years, I might as well be happy and enjoy this time. And so I started doing the research and ultimately transferred to NYU, which is where I graduated from. And I transferred midway through my sophomore year of college, which was a really risky decision, but it was also a moment where I felt like I really needed to invest in myself and my happiness. And so I made the switch halfway through because I just could not stand to be, where I was any longer, and really figured that NYU could be a better space for me kind of academically and socially. And so I made the switch there, and I really enjoyed the program I was in. Like you mentioned before, when reading my bio, I studied social and cultural analysis, which ultimately was about how do we critically think about the ways in which people navigate the societies and communities that they are a part of, or the societies and communities in which they exist within. And so within that, I focused specifically in metropolitan studies and African American studies. So I was still doing a little bit of the work I was doing when I was at Boston College, but I was completely committed to a whole kind of robust academic study about these things, and I loved it. I had an incredible time intellectually. I felt like it was a very creative and innovative space. And so academically, it was great, but I think socially, I had a really hard time. Like I said, I transferred midway through my sophomore year, and usually it's in the beginning of each semester when people kind of establish their friend groups. They know who their friends are. And so to be the new kid in a big city where people like to be left alone, no one wants to be bothered by anyone, it was really hard to kind of enter into a space not knowing anyone, but just trying to figure it out. And it was, for me, a time where I realized, failure isn't an option. And I felt a lot of pressure, mainly because when I was at Boston College, I had a full ride, a great scholarship. And even when I was deciding to transfer, my mom was like, you got a full ride, just stay there. 4 years isn't a long time. It's better that you graduate debt-free. But I thought, because I care too much about my happiness, too much about, my well-being, I'm still going to transfer. I'll take on loans. But if I was going to do that, it had to be, with the assumption that I would be successful and feel successful in this new space. And so not only did I need to feel kind of academically enriched, it was also important for me to feel socially like this was a better space for me. So it dawned on me very quickly, like I need to be my own best advocate, getting involved, whether it be through like different academic social clubs or different things, getting myself acquainted with the city, going up to the Schomburg Center and going to lectures all the time, just to kind of, gain that sense of community as well. And rather not fall into a state of, I'm not happy, I don't have a friend group or anything like that. So it's really important to, like I said earlier, invest in myself, but also have a mentality that, these are my goals that I set out to achieve, and it's really game time. I have to show up for myself and really do these things. And then pivoting, afterwards, where I got more comfortable, I got my footing after settling into the city, I, was thinking about what would I do kind of professionally after college. And mind you, for the summers prior, I had done teaching fellowships because I definitely was going the nonprofit educational route. And that's what I thought I wanted to do. But I wound up in a recruiting process for Goldman Sachs, and so I actually interviewed through NYU's recruiting process with Goldman, and I got the summer internship the summer right before my senior year, and I ended up in the environmental, social, and governance team after doing some research and seeing that the division had this particular team. I thought, hey, it's really kind of well suited with my interests, so I should probably go for it. And that's the place that I felt like I could be most successful and kind of helpful to the firm, but more specifically to the team and the division. And so it worked out. I had a definite like summer of growth in a lot of ways because that was my first corporate experience. But yeah, so I went back to school and decided ultimately to go back to Goldman that following year after I graduated. And so it was interesting because during my senior year, I thought, oh, I'll still apply to grad school, because that was my ultimate intention. I thought, okay, I'm going to go to grad school, I'm going to get my PhD, I'm going to be a professor and teach, because I didn't think long term that corporate America was my route, but it was something that, it was good that I had that experience, but I just didn't think it was going to be my route. But in applying to grad school, I thought, wow, this is a huge commitment. I'm also in the midst of writing my senior year thesis, and grad school is going to be a lot more of the experience I was having at that moment, which was very kind of intense, very stressful. And I also I wasn't excited about, the offers that I got for grad school that particular time. So I thought, you know what, I'll go back to Goldman, and I'll have that experience before I then apply to grad school again. So I went back to the firm, and I started July of 2016, and come November, my manager, who actually managed me while I was an intern, was also, the head of my team when I came back full time. And come November, she had said, you know what, I'm leaving the firm to go be the executive director of, a nonprofit in the city. And I thought, wow, a lot of my coming back to the firm was because I knew she was going to be there. I knew she was an advocate for me. So I was already in kind of a state of panic. I did have a great manager, though, and so there was that support system, but I still felt like I didn't know what I was going to do. And so at that time, I was having conversations with friends and mentors, and a mentor of mine was saying, oh, you know what, why don't you just apply to grad school? And in my mind, I thought, you know what, no, I was going to wait. I didn't like my GRE scores. I wanted to take some time to study, get them up, hopefully get better graduate school offers when I applied, maybe 2-3 years down the road. He said, no, don't worry about, your GRE scores. Just have a really original, compelling idea. And so, time passed. Of course, I didn't take that advice to heart. I didn't apply to schools. I missed all these deadlines. And then it was New Year's Day of the following year, 2017. And I realized, okay, I missed all the deadlines to all these schools. Yale is the only school I haven't missed the deadline for. And so I sat down New Year's Day and wrote, my application, wrote my research statement, got all the materials together and applied, just to say, okay, at least I can say I applied and I can put that behind me. Fully expecting to get a rejection. And I thought, okay, at least I can say I applied, and then I'll have my 2 years time to, actually prepare for the GRE and reapply later when, I'm on the timeline that I had created for myself. And then much to my surprise, I actually got in, and I thought, places like Yale don't typically, say yes twice. And so I thought, okay, well, maybe this is the time that I should be going, even though I didn't feel ready. But as I started to consider it more, it kind of made sense. And I thought, why not? While still being given the flexibility to live in Brooklyn and commute to school and still feel very comfortable in that. So I got in, and I started my dual PhD program in August of 2017. And, it's come with its fair share of challenges for sure. I think my first semester commuting was difficult. I had 4 a.m. mornings, getting up to Connecticut and all of that. And the academics was very rigorous, and I think my undergrad had prepared me well. But, you're reading multiple books a week, you're writing multiple papers, and factor all that into, also trying to have, balanced life and live a balanced life can be pretty tricky. But all of that to say, I realized very early on, it's a process. You trust yourself through that process and be gentle with yourself, because we as people, as humans, we have limits, and recognizing those limits and being easy with yourself through that recognition became really important for me, as well as, always advocating for myself and really kind of building a voice for myself within, the classrooms that I was a part of, because doing a PhD program is very different than like undergrad, even though I was coming into it with this assumption like, oh, I'm a student, like I'll read, write, do my homework, whatever. but, people refer to each other as colleagues. It's not like they're my classmates, because this is a profession for life. These people that I'm in class with now are going to be the people who, put my book or my scholarship on their syllabus and teach it to their students and such like that. And so it kind of forced me to think about the long game and how this is really a professional career. These people I'm engaging with, are my colleagues. And so really crafting my own voice to make sure that, my thoughts and opinions are heard in the room, just like any other professional who would be in a room and wanting their voice to be heard and their opinions to be heard and appreciated. So I know that's a long version of my story, but that's a little bit about me and how I started studying what I study. I will say to your question about how I started studying anthropology specifically, it kind of stumbled to me because, like I said, I studied more so metropolitan studies, African American studies, but it was just so that when I was at NYU, the people that I was most inspired by and their work I most respected were anthropologists, and they sat within the social and cultural analysis department, and their work was really captivating. I felt like it was cutting edge. It was political. It was doing all of the things that I wanted my own work to do. And so I realized that they were anthropologists, so I thought, oh, this makes sense. The study of, and I identify and define anthropology as being the study of the discrepancy between how life is lived and how life is portrayed. And I found that anthropologists out of any other discipline were doing that the best, whether it be historians, mathematicians, economists, what have you. I always found that I thought anthropologists was doing that work the best. And so that's why I was drawn to it. That's why I ultimately decided to study social and cultural anthropology.
Well, Rachel, I'm so glad that you are studying anthropology because I feel like you're going to be able to tell us and you have a different perspective, a different insight that only anthropologists would have. And I think that's so important for this show because we haven't heard an anthropologist. And Rachel, we are really spending this time to learn about you. So all of us are just really tuned in, wanting to know exactly who you are. And I guess now we're going to get into some of the fun stuff because one, you told us what you're studying, why you're studying it, who you are. But I think it's time that we touch your business. What started your love for plantains and how did you start your business?
Yeah. So what started my love for plantains, like I said, I grew up in a Ghanaian home, and you talk to, any West African, I feel like I have a lot of faith that they will say that they grew up around plantains or they grew up eating plantains. It's just a staple in, West African cuisine. And so that was very much the case in my childhood. And my mom, I still remember she had this black frying pan that she would use, and she would make kelewele. And kelewele is plantains marinated in spices, and they're usually served with ground nuts. But my mom, she would just make the kelewele by itself. But if you go to Ghana, you'll see kelewele being sold as street food. Just like, here you might go to a festival or something, people are selling hot dogs and hamburgers. There they're selling kelewele. And so that was my first introduction to plantains as a child, and I just loved them, obsessed with them. And so I've always kind of grew up on them. And when it comes to how I started my business, I'd always had this love for plantains, and I was always kind of making them, frying them, grilling them, boiling them, literally whatever you could think of I was doing. And that coupled with, this nagging idea that I had in my mind, like, a lot of times when you go to restaurants and you see plantains on the menu, they're usually on the side menu, and they're usually just like fried with some salt on top, and they taste delicious that way, don't get me wrong, but that's usually all that you're seeing with them. I think, and I say usually because there are some variations you see in kind of like Latin cuisine. People are doing some cool stuff with them, and this is all within an American context I'm talking about. You go to a restaurant within the States, you usually don't see that much innovation happening with plantains. And so that, in relation to like how I grew up on them, was eating them all the time, so had this appreciation for them. it was around March of this year. It was my spring break, and I was just in this moment of like, I should just do it. I was talking to friends, and they're saying, you should just do it. Just start cooking your stuff, writing down your menus, or writing down your recipes, getting a menu together. And so I was just getting a lot of positive reinforcement and encouragement from friends and family. And so I just decided to go for it. And it's so interesting because at different stages of my life, plantains have had I've had a different appreciation for plantains at those different stages. Like when I was an undergrad, a broke undergraduate student, I would get them all the time because I could get them like 4 for $1. So I'd fry them up, make them all the time. And then after school, towards the latter half of my undergraduate career, when I transitioned into vegetarianism, plantains are vegan, so they were perfect. I could eat them all the time. And so now, as, I think about, the lack of, innovative dishes that I see in the food market today, and coupled with my love for them, I thought, why not create like a plantain food truck that serves really innovative dishes that are drawing upon Latin cuisine, West African cuisine, South Asian cuisine, Caribbean cuisine. So I was really excited about how, I could tap into, this one food that for a lot of us we have some similarity or some familiarity to, I should say, and kind of really take them from the side menu and put them in the center. Through, using them and creating really innovative dishes with plantains being the central ingredient. Okay.
We all know that because you're in the food business, distribution is key, especially because you want to have your very own food truck one day and also feed the masses at any given time. What's your process like? Do you plan on going to stores soon? Just tell us about distribution and how you've been able to go from just 4 plantains in your house to now selling it to people outside.
Right. Yeah, so that's definitely been something I've spent a lot of time thinking and rethinking about. Back when I decided to make this official, and I really was intentional about starting back in March, I had to create a plan. And so part of that plan was around how do I scale this? And so for me, I was lucky in the sense that, I live in New York, and so I had the luxury of being in a space where people are always looking for new, original, creative food ideas. And so I had that working for me. And so I thought, okay, festivals. You see them all the time in the summer. People are always looking to try new things, whether it's like Smorgasburg or different festivals that are happening in the city. So I thought, okay, I can commit to making sure that Kelewele gets into at least one festival this summer and continue to do maybe other festivals or different markets throughout the rest of the year. And while I'm doing that, I'm building kind of a strong, loyal fan base. I'm also leveraging social media to get the product out there in terms of marketing. I'm also spending time connecting with people, networking, going to events just to introduce myself, say, hey, I created this company, this is what I do, and try to get work based on, those different networking events and trying to connect with people. And so while I'm not focusing exclusively on like festivals and things like that, I'm also focusing on, connecting, whether it be like through different like catering events that I can secure as well. Also, I can build up to, getting enough money to ultimately buy that food truck and then see what happens from there. So that's kind of been my scale plan. And it's been going well so far. I committed myself to doing at least one festival. I did a 5-day festival a few weeks ago, and I have 2 more festivals that I'll be doing before the summer's over. And then, I did a catering event, and then I have a couple additional really exciting things in the pipeline. And so it's part of it is like just getting started, and then as you continue to build momentum, things start to present itself as opportunities, but also so much of it is about, okay, really hustling and, getting in front of people, sharing your idea, telling people what you're doing. And I think the mixture of those things have been able to keep me on this scaling plan that I have.
Okay, and my next question is, how did you learn to perfect your craft? Because, again, you know it's food, and you can't just say, oh, well, I know how to cook this thing great one time. How did you learn to perfect your craft?
Yeah, so when I said, I'm going to start this back in March, what that meant in the beginning was I need to start cooking plantains all of the time, which is what I was doing. I was, I was making traditional dishes and like innovating them and finding ways to really incorporate the plantains and highlight them. I was taking more American dishes, and, innovating them and, inserting plantains in them. And I was doing a lot of research around, Latin food, Caribbean food, South Asian food, African food, and seeing where plantains are being used, how they're being used, and like how I can also put my spin on things. And so, when I'm not doing research or I'm not doing other things, rest assured, it's like I'm in my kitchen making plantain ice cream or something crazy with plantains, because it's not like you said, you can't just make something once and it's perfect. It's about constantly making it. Even if you make it pretty well every time, there's always something new perhaps that you can add to it or innovate or be creative and try something new. I think some of the most exciting stuff I've made were mistakes or things that were unintentional, and you can't have that unless you're always trying to make new things. And so that was definitely the first step for me when I started, and it continues to be a big priority for me.
Well, I love what you just said. Like, the best things that you have made have been mistakes. So you guys, if you're out there and you're trying to do something and you think you're messing up, Rachel just told you that some of the best things that you can make could potentially and have been mistakes of her own. So I think that that's a word of encouragement,
Yeah, absolutely.
So I like to do this thing where we do PTN, pen, paper, note-taking time. And this is our moment to really educate our listeners, educate the people that need to know key information that they have never heard before. And I want to really take it back because you are anthropologists, and I want to really get your key perspective on this. What is the African American diaspora? A lot of people still don't know what this is, and I think it's really key for us to just take this as a time to learn and say, after this conversation, we touched on it, we know what it is, and we are no longer afraid of all different colors of people, no matter where they come from, but they all started from Africa.
Yeah, I mean, I would just build upon what you just said. I think that the African diaspora is a collection of African communities that ultimately descended from the continent of Africa. And so you'll have different migration stories of people descending from the continent. And one forceful migration that was involuntary that we all have an understanding of is the Atlantic slave trade as being the major ways in which African people from the continent were forcefully taken from their communities within the continent and spread out to different parts of the Americas, i.e. being Brazil or other parts of the Caribbean or Colombia or even the United States. But when we talk about the African diaspora, it's an understanding that while, some people might identify as African American, other people might identify as African, others might identify as Afro-Caribbean, the ultimate origin story and the place from which we descended was the continent.
What is the discourse in the African American diaspora? Sometimes when I've heard different stories of, and this is not to be made fun of, but when African American students, when they're kids, they may come in contact with someone from Africa, they may call them names. Or even for myself, I'm from Pine Bluff, Arkansas. I did not know any Africans until I moved to Houston. And a lot of my friends always laugh at me, but it's the complete truth. because no one from Africa was just coming to Arkansas just as their first course or their first place to live. So there's always been some kind of like confrontation or like misunderstanding between people that are African American born here and like people that come here from Africa. Like, what is that discourse, and like how can we really like, you know, settle it where we all know, just like in Wakanda, we all good, we all family. What is our middle ground that we can find between each other?
Yeah, in terms of the middle ground, I think the common ground is an understanding that while our individual routes might have been different in life, you were in Texas, I grew up in Virginia, even though, my family's from Ghana. We all have different routes, but there is an understanding, or the common ground should be the shared understanding that we all have come from the same roots, and those roots being the African continent. And I think you were touching on where the discourse is now, and it's complicated. I think we live in a moment of consciousness raising where more and more people are understanding this common ground that is shared between people of the African diaspora. And there's an embrace of, one's, community. But at the same time, I think that the conversation sometimes is more negative or not as positive as it could be. And I think that there are very real reasons for that. So one being maybe like a lack of awareness, right, between African American lived experiences versus like an African lived experience. And not to say that because one African, you fully understand what it means to have an African lived experience. It's not this kind of monolithic experience. So I'm not saying that at all, but sometimes we just don't even have an understanding of what just one experience for someone else might be. And so when we speak from a place of ignorance, speak from a place of lack of understanding, then you have a lot of this kind of negative discourse that goes around where it's, people make comments like, oh, they're fresh off the boat, or, I remember growing up, being in a Ghanaian home where there was a word called, the word is akata, which is basically like a loose translation of saying like ghetto, and that was attributed to African Americans. And so there were ways in which we were kind of oppressing each other, right? But a lot of it came from a lack of awareness or a distance created between us and each other, rather than, appreciating the common ground in which we come from and learning from each other and learning from our varied experiences in order to further encourage and uplift each other. And I think, it's more than just, names or, different kind of social differences, but also class-based differences, educational differences. We also live in a time where the color line is an issue. Within Black communities, you have, the whole light skin or dark skin, team light skin, things like that also negatively impact our ability to connect with each other. There's a lack sometimes of knowledge of our shared culture, and, so many times you see instances and stories in which a particular African American tradition rooted in the South actually had its origins in particular West African, East African, South African cultures and communities. And we can only know that by engaging with each other, locally, globally, to understand kind of the broader common ground that we share. And so I think while the discourse is troubled in some ways, there are things to be optimistic and positive about when it comes to if we're able to put, those kind of more negative, more oppressing things, more disparaging things aside and recognize that, hey, we all are a shared kind of collective people. Let's build on that. There's a lot of opportunity for growth and kind of just betterment, I would say.
I agree, and I really appreciate your perspective again, Rachel, because these are just conversations that we just may not be having, or we think we know it all because we have a friend from Nigeria, Ghana, or Zimbabwe, but we really may not understand the full context of things. And so thank you for that insight.
Yeah.
So I also want you to tell us about your friend who recently found out about their origin and roots, and You know, a lot of us, and for African Americans, we may have to take a test just to figure out where we are 90% or 80% from, because I know we may be mixed with a lot of things. But can somebody that takes a test just get on a plane, go back to their country and say, hey, y'all, I'm one of you. You know, like, we're family. Can that happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think, best case scenario that would happen where, someone who identifies as African American, and in this case, born and raised in Brooklyn, and, they're really adamant about doing their DNA testing to see where they came from. And best case scenario is like they find out where they're from and they go to the continent with open arms, really excited. But then a question that has to be addressed is this person going to be greeted with open arms? Because for the very reasons that we talked about before, where the discourse sometimes gets into this kind of negative, disparaging place, there might not be that immediate connection between, the person who, ancestors migrated from the continent for whatever reason is now coming back. There might not be kind of an acceptance or an appreciation that person has returned. And the goal, I think, is to make sure that there is that appreciation, that opportunity to say, hey, you've come back by way of your ancestors. Let's have a conversation. Let's engage. Let's learn from each other. What's your experience been like living in, Brooklyn, New York for X amount of years? This is my experience. Our experiences living here. How can we now better understand each other and ourselves because of our different experiences? But that doesn't always happen, and so I think part of the goal is to start to have a greater appreciation for, the global in terms of like our globally lived experiences. And I think Black Panther, I have my feelings about that movie, but I think one of the things it touched upon that allowed for further conversation was this very question of diaspora, and when the diaspora encounters each other. What does it mean for an African American or Afro-Caribbean to go to the continent for the first time or amongst one of the first times and to engage in the communities from which their ancestors came from? It could be a tense experience, but I would say the hope is that through that tense experience, there's learning that happens and there's an opportunity for growth and solidarity to be created.
Thank you, Rachel. I mean, it's so hard. If I could just take a moment, it's hard because when I talk to my friends, we do have a culture. When I think about the music we listen to, or even like soul food, or, just some of the experiences that our African Americans share, I just want us all to be like, you know what, hey, we are one family. Because in America, when people see us, they don't see, someone from Ghana, someone from Nigeria, someone from Zimbabwe. They don't go that deep. They just say you Black.
Absolutely.
And I know we all have our own cultural, distinctions and things that we do that are different, but I just want us all to be on the same page. And I don't know the best. What is the best way to just get us all on the same page? Because I think Black Panther was one step, and I know you said you got your opinions of that movie. But what is a tangible next step for us so that we can begin to get on the same page?
Yeah. I mean, that's a hard question because I think it can be so different for each person. But back to one of the questions you asked me earlier about, what is something that we can improve on given this political climate, given this political moment? And I think what I said, I would say here again around continuing to educate ourselves and to better understand ourselves, not just as individuals, but as individuals part of a bigger collective. And yes, we might have, these cultural distinctions between, being an African American and what that experience might be like for you as opposed to being African, right? And the food that you eat, the music that you listen to, the things that you do for fun or whatever it is. But pushing ourselves to understand ourselves in context, in relation to other people, specifically other people within the African diaspora. Because it's not until we really have an understanding of where we've come from, I think, is my personal opinion, will we better understand ourselves and ourselves within our communities here, right? And so even for me, I'll give an example where I've begun to get more acquainted, and I'm meeting more and more actually Ghanaians in New York City, which is something that I didn't really experience when I first moved here. But to really appreciate that experience, I've had to do the work of really engaging with my own Ghanaian background and like engaging with kind of what that means culturally for me, what that means socially for me as well, which only further enriches my experience when I engage with other Ghanaians here in the city or elsewhere. And that's just one particular example, right? But if I, said, out of curiosity, what can be learned about an African American lived experience here in the city? And what can that tell me about what their experience is like moving through, their community? And what can that then tell me about myself and our connectivity together? And so I would say that the first step is being open-minded in the sense of being curious about, the diaspora, being curious about communities that you can belong to bigger than yourself, right? And I think having that kind of open-mindedness and a willingness to learn can go, leaps and bounds in terms of how we can connect with each other and really arrive at that common ground I was talking about before. And Black Panther, I think, does that, helps us get there because at the very least, it creates yet another conversation for us to be having about, oh, what was that moment like for, Killmonger to go to Wakanda for the first time and experience that? What might that would have been like? And how is that in any way similar or dissimilar from what it would be like for an African American here to go to Ghana or go to Nigeria or go to wherever, and what that experience might be like? Right? So it started a conversation. And so I think the first step is being curious, is about being willing to engage in a conversation and seeing where that takes us,
I completely agree. So, back to your business. What are some of the crazy good things you can do with plantains?
Yeah, a lot of crazy stuff with plantains. So I should say everything that I do is vegan or vegetarian. I don't use meat. But I'll make plantain donuts, pie. I have these plantain books that I make that I'll stuff with like veggies. I also do like a banana split, which is my take on a banana split, and stuff it with some ice cream and different toppings. So it's a whole bunch of different stuff. One of the more traditional Ghanaian dishes I'll do, which is called red, which is black-eyed beans stewed in a tomato sauce and usually served with plantains on the side. I'll actually make plantain boats and put the stew inside as well. But that's just a couple of things. I do a whole bunch.
I know, you guys, and you should definitely check out her Instagram. She shows you just about everything that you can do with the plantain. But you didn't cover one thing. I believe when we talked about it, you said that in American culture, people use potatoes. But
right.
I need you to touch on that. Hit on that, really.
Yeah. Right. So I think that's been another really powerful thing that has come about as I've been undergoing this experience, is that there's a whole political discourse around plantains and potatoes. So within an American context, within a Western context, not just American context, the starch of choice is typically potatoes. And I mean, you see that time and time again, when you're just looking at starch recipes or, different things. Usually it's a potato or a sweet potato that people are using. So it's kind of like a staple within the Western cuisine, potatoes. But within parts of the diaspora and, in a Latin context, Caribbean, African, even parts of Asia, plantains are actually the starch of choice. And you see people using either the green ones or the yellow ones, and that's the staple. And so part of the work that I do, and this is more so kind of like inadvertently, is to not only, make sure plantains have an equal ground in like the food market and industry, but also to kind of destabilize this like what has become this like natural inclination for potatoes to be the starch of choice, when there's this whole discourse around different communities actually using plantains instead. So I think Kelewele has been a platform in which, we can be reminded that many, many communities across the globe actually prioritize this particular food item over potatoes, even though within an American and Western context, a lot of people don't even know what plantains are, So I think part of my work is also about challenging the discourse and also making something that in certain contexts would be unfamiliar to folks and making that.
I agree. I don't think I found out about plantains until maybe 2 years ago when my best friend Lexus made them. And I was like, wow, this tastes really good. So I can only imagine what all of your food tastes like. So can you tell the audience something quick or something easy that they can make with plantains right now in their home?
Absolutely. So something that's really easy and also just like fun to make is a plantain pizza. And you're probably wondering, where's the plantain in this? And it's actually in the crust. So you're making a plantain pizza crust. And you just take some flour, oregano, some salt, some cheese, and then obviously the plantain. And you mix that all together. You can make it with egg if you want to. You don't have to, but you mix that all together. And that is the crust base. That's your dough, essentially. And so you get that on a nice baking sheet, and you pop that in the oven for a little bit. And then when it's about, halfway cooked, you want to take it out. And then you'll put down your sauce and then whatever toppings you want. And then and some cheese, of course. And then you'll throw it back into the oven for another 15, 20 minutes. And then you've got plantain pizza, just like that. It's very, very easy. In total, it should take you no more than, half an hour to make. And even making the dough itself, the plantain dough, takes no time at all. So that's a fun, easy plantain meal that you could do.
Okay, and is it just as easy as making a plantain black bean burger?
It's easier. I think the plantain black bean burger is also very easy. There's just a couple more steps, and for the plantain black bean burger, it's like you get a plantain, you blend it up, you get some black beans, you mash them up, throw them in there, and then you add some spices. I like to do, cumin, salt, and then some African spices that I'll put in there, and then a little bit of flour just to hold it together. You blend that together, and then you can either bake it or you can fry it. If you're going the healthier route, bake it. Otherwise, you can fry it, and you can get a really nice char on it if you do it in a skillet, so it tastes like you're eating a burger, and it sticks together, because I think a lot of veggie burgers, they break apart on you if they're made out of like quinoa or even just like black beans. You have or veggies, it's hard sometimes, but this one really sticks together. Fry both sides for a few minutes and then toast your bun, put whatever toppings you want, and it's also really easy. It's delicious.
Thank you, Rachel. And where can we see you in the next few years? I mean, we know you're about to become a future doctor, and of course, Kelewele is going to take off and go to magical places. But we know you have other dreams and aspirations. But what is it that what can we see coming soon?
Yeah, I think that I'm at the intersection of a few things. One of them being, having a really deep interest in teaching and, being a professor. And so that's something I do want to do. Another thing for me is consulting. And I say that because the work that I do, because I work on race and finance and thinking more generally about corporations, corporate bodies and how people engage with those corporate institutions, I think that I'm well positioned to do consulting work that is at the nexus of understanding diversity, inclusion, management, and strategy initiatives, and how to do that more effectively. given my academic background and doing it from an academic perspective, an anthropological perspective. And so that's another piece of my story. And then also Kelewele and doing all of this plantain madness. So those are kind of the three things I'm really passionate about. And so where you'll see me in the next few years is hopefully, teaching, of course, writing and doing consulting, but then also continuing to lead the charge in getting plantains out there within the food scene.
Okay, and I have my final question, which is, what does walking by faith mean to you?
That's a great question. I think walking by faith is trusting the process. It's believing not only in yourself, right, but also believing in what I would consider, a bigger purpose, which sometimes it feels like I'm driving that purpose, but sometimes it feels like that purpose has been laid on me and my heart to do something. And so trusting in that purpose, trusting in that kind of belief in what I'm destined to do. And it's not easy all the time. I think that, I'll just go back to what I was saying before when I was at Boston College and I was moving to NYU. Like, that was a really tough decision for me. And it wasn't just about, Rachel's happiness. It was also this kind of like feeling inside me that I have to do this, or there's something just calling me to make this change. And so trusting into that, leaning into that and moving forward in that and believing that wherever this idea is coming from, but this strong, feeling that I have inside of me that's also, further compounded by my own desire to move in this experience is something that is worth investing in. It's worth, exploring. And so I can apply that to so many different experiences that I've had, but it's really about trusting the process and believing that what has been put on my heart to do and what has been put on my heart by things that I might not understand in that moment is worth doing and worth kind of engaging in and exploring.
Wow, Rachel, I think what really touched me is that it was the fear of just moving and going to that next stage, and you had no idea what would happen, but you also had something inside of you that said, what I have is my ideal is something so much bigger than myself. And I think both of those two provided you just the ambition you needed to just say, hey, I'm leaving Goldman. Hey, I'm starting in Kelewele. Hey, I'm about to continue my degree in anthropology despite what people may be saying. You really have just put it all together and just with the foundation of faith, which I think is just so beautiful.
Thank you, Jasmine. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. And the Bible scripture that I chose for today is 1 Timothy 4:4-5. It says, for everything God created is good, and nothing is to be rejected if it is received with thanksgiving, because it is consecrated by the word of God in prayer. So the reason why I chose this is because God created Plantains. God created you, Rachel. God created us to be able to study all different walks of life, how people live, how people use the things that are on this earth. And nothing is to be rejected, but everything is to be received with thanksgiving. And I just really felt that, one, during Thanksgiving, we all like to feast. But two, on a more serious note, we just have to understand that there are so many different cultures, so many different perspectives in this world. And by you giving us a diverse taste of plantains and giving it to us in whichever form you choose, and especially it being like a vegan, vegetarian option, we just got to thank you, because you said, I'm not going to reject these plantains. I'm not going to reject potatoes either. I'm just going to really introduce you into something that you've never seen before. And Rachel, I think you're doing a darn good job at it.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And I just want to say thank you to my friend Hannah Billups for sending me your contact information and for connecting us. Where can people find you so that they can learn more about what you're doing? They can follow you in your movement. Like, just tell us all your social media handles.
Yes. So right now, I'm really focused on Instagram, and so folks can find me at Kelewele NYC, and that is KELEWELE NYC, and so you can find all the stuff that I'm cooking up, baking up there, all things plantains, and then that's also linked to my Facebook, which is also Kelewele NYC, so really easy to find. But if people are interested in emailing me as well, at kelewelenyc@gmail.com, you can reach out to me there for like different catering or vending inquiries that you have. But all of my information and contact is on Instagram, so you can find me there, on Facebook. You can reach out to me that way. Yeah, and especially on my Instagram, I have all of my upcoming festivals and different big events that we have going on. So that's a really great way to stay connected and kind of come out and try all the plantain stuff because we have a lot more planned this summer. So I would definitely stay connected through Instagram and see what we're up to.
Okay, and you know what? Who would have thought that you can do so much with the plantain in so many different ways? And I am just so happy that you are a guest on this show. And I now know someone who has taken their passions of history to make the world more inclusive and understandable. So we thank you, Rachel, and all the folks out here listening. Follow Rachel, support Rachel, especially as she moves into her next endeavors in life. And let's just welcome this future doctor, okay? And she's a Black woman killing the game. And just stay tuned next week for another episode on the Walk by Faith Show. This is all, guys. See you next week.
If you want more content like this, make sure you give the Walk by Faith podcast a 5-star rating and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. You can follow me on Instagram at __ the pretty plug and follow all updates on the podcast at WBF Podcasts. To those already supporting the show with a monthly subscription, thank you. If you're not already a supporter and you'd like to help make this show possible, tap the link in this episode's description or visit anchor.fm/jasmine-a-stith to become a monthly supporter. That's all, folks. Tune in next week for another episode on the Walk by Faith Show.